The cream-colored envelope sat on my kitchen counter like an accusation. Admiral Victoria Hartwell. It read in elegant calligraphy. Not Vicky. Not even Victoria. The full title, printed with the kind of precision that suggested whoever addressed it had looked me up specifically to get it right. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I stared at it for 20 minutes before opening it. The morning sun streamed through the windows of my Alexandria apartment, catching the gold embossing on the envelope's edges. Outside, the Potomac moved slowly past, indifferent to the small drama unfolding in my kitchen. Inside was everything I expected and nothing I wanted. Ivory cardstock, raised lettering, the works. Mr. and Mrs. Richard Hartwell request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter, Madison Claire Hartwell, to Captain James Mitchell Thompson. The date was circled in gold ink, 3 weeks away. My sister was getting married to a Marine captain, and apparently I was invited. The irony tasted bitter in my coffee. Madison had spent the last 8 years pretending I didn't exist. No Christmas cards, no birthday calls, not even a text when I'd been promoted to Admiral 2 years ago. The last conversation we'd had was at our father's funeral, where she'd stood on the opposite side of the grave and refused to meet my eyes. Now she wanted me at her wedding. The apartment around me was sparse but comfortable. Navy regulation had trained me to live efficiently, and old habits die hard. A few framed commendations on the walls, a bookshelf lined with maritime histories and strategic studies, a single photograph of my crew from the USS Yorktown on the mantel. Nothing that screamed, "Look at me." Everything that whispered, "Earned." I picked up my phone and scrolled to Mom's contact, Richard Hartwell. We'd been reduced to last names years ago, too. The call went straight to voicemail, his voice, formal and distant. "You've reached Richard Hartwell. Please leave a detailed message." I didn't. Instead, I walked to the window and looked out at the river. A cargo ship was making its way downstream, heavy with containers, purpose written in every line of its hull. I knew that feeling, the weight of responsibility, the clarity of mission. What I didn't know was how to navigate the treacherous waters of my family. The wedding invitation came with a note, handwritten in Madison's careful script. "Victoria, I know things have been complicated between us, but this is important. James wants to meet you. Please come. Marasane, Pame." James wants to meet me, not "I want you there" or "I've missed you." James wants to meet me. As if I were some curiosity, some exotic specimen her fiancé had heard about and wanted to examine. I set the invitation down and walked to my home office. The walls here told a different story. Photos from naval academies around the world. Certificates of completion from advanced warfare schools. A shadow box containing my medals. The Bronze Star sat next to the Navy Cross, both earned in waters most people couldn't pronounce. The phone rang. Unknown number. Admiral Hartwell? The voice was young, female, unfamiliar. Speaking. "This is Lieutenant Sarah Chen from Captain Thompson's unit. I'm calling about the wedding arrangements. The captain wanted me to coordinate with you about seating and protocol." I sat down slowly. "Protocol?" "Yes, ma'am. Given your rank, there are certain considerations for the ceremony. Captain Thompson was very specific about ensuring proper military courtesy." "I see. And what did Captain Thompson suggest?" There was a pause. "He requested that you be seated with the military personnel in the 3rd section, ma'am. He said you'd understand the appropriateness of that arrangement." The 3rd section, not family, not honored guests, with the other service members where my uniform would blend into the crowd and my presence wouldn't complicate the narrative. "Lieutenant Chen," I said carefully, "did Captain Thompson mention my relationship to the bride?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Ma'am, he said you were an important colleague of the family." A colleague. I was Madison's sister, and to her future husband, I was a colleague. "I'll call you back about the seating," I said. "Yes, ma'am. Should I tell Captain Thompson you'll be attending?" I looked at the invitation again, at Madison's careful handwriting, at the gold embossing that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Tell Captain Thompson that Admiral Hartwell will make her decision based on operational considerations." "Understood, ma'am." After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my office. The afternoon light was shifting, casting long shadows across the floor. Somewhere in Camp Pendleton, a Marine captain was planning his wedding and categorizing his future sister-in-law as a colleague. Somewhere in Richmond, my sister was preparing for the biggest day of her life and treating my attendance like a diplomatic negotiation. I opened my laptop and pulled up Captain James Thompson's service record. It was impressive, in its way. 3 deployments, solid fitness reports, fast-tracked for major. The kind of career that looked good on paper and promised a bright future. But as I read through his assignments, something nagged at me. Afghanistan, 2018-2019, the Helmand Province. The timing made me pause. I pulled up my own service records from that period, scrolling through mission reports I hadn't looked at in years. Operation Neptune's Spear, a joint Navy-Marine operation in the Kajaki district. We'd provided naval gunfire support for a Marine unit that had gotten pinned down by insurgents. Captain J.M. Thompson, 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force. I sat back in my chair. James Thompson wasn't just any Marine captain. He was the Marine captain whose unit I'd helped extract from a firefight 3 years ago. The same captain who'd sent a formal thank you letter to my command, praising the naval support that had saved his men. And now he was marrying my sister, calling me a colleague, and seating me with the other uniforms. The pieces of a puzzle I didn't know I was solving began to click into place. Madison's sudden interest in having me at the wedding. James's careful protocol discussions. The formal invitation addressed my full rank. This wasn't about family reconciliation. This wasn't about healing old wounds or moving forward together. This was about optics. I closed the laptop and walked back to the kitchen. The invitation sat where I'd left it, cream and gold and full of implications I was only beginning to understand. Outside, the sun was setting over the Potomac, painting the water in shades of amber and red. For the first time in 8 years, Madison wanted me somewhere. Not because she missed me, not because she'd had some revelation about family, but because having a sister who was an admiral would look good at her wedding. The question wasn't whether I would go. The question was what I planned to do when I got there. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't called in months. Admiral Patricia Knox, my mentor at the Naval War College, and one of the few people who knew the whole story about my family. Patricia, it's Victoria. I need to ask you something about military protocol at civilian weddings. Her laugh was warm and knowing. Oh, honey, what has your family done now? The Naval Academy didn't prepare you for everything. 4 years of leadership training, tactical studies, and honor codes couldn't teach you how to handle a mother who introduced you as our daughter who chose the military, with the same tone she might use for, quote, or a daughter who joined a cult. Quote, I was 17 when I told them I wanted Annapolis. Madison was 15, already homecoming queen, already planning her debut into Richmond society. We sat around the mahogany dining table in our Henrico County home, the one with the crystal chandelier and the oil paintings of ancestors who'd never served anything more dangerous than mint juleps. The Navy? Mother had set down her fork with surgical precision. Victoria, sweetheart, that's so masculine. Dad had been different then, proud even. Richard Hartwell had built his pharmaceutical empire from nothing, understood the value of discipline and dedication. If that's what she wants, Patricia, the Academy produces leaders. But Mother's disapproval filled the room like smoke. What about William and Mary? You could study international relations, meet the right sort of people. Admirals' wives have such limited social opportunities. I don't want to be an admiral's wife, I'd said. I want to be an admiral. Madison had giggled into her napkin. Even then, she'd understood that our mother's world had no place for women who commanded ships instead of planning dinner parties. The rift started small. Missed phone calls during plebe year. No care packages during finals. When I made the dean's list, the congratulations card arrived 2 weeks late with a note. We're proud, dear, but don't forget there's more to life than grades. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Madison, meanwhile, sailed through prep school like she was born to it. Student council president, charity fundraiser, the kind of daughter who looked perfect in family Christmas cards. Her boyfriend junior year was the son of a federal judge. Senior year, it was a congressman's nephew. Mother glowed with each introduction. Madison has such a gift for bringing people together, she'd tell her bridge club friends. She could be an ambassador's wife someday. At my academy graduation, I stood in formation of the brigade while my classmates' families cheered from the stands. Mother wore white gloves and a hat that blocked the sun. Dad clapped politely. Madison checked her phone. The real break came 3 years later, when I was deployed on the USS Princeton in the Persian Gulf. Madison's engagement to Bradley Whitmore III made the Richmond Society pages. Son of old tobacco money, Harvard Law, future senior partner at his father's firm. The wedding was planned for spring at St. John's Episcopal, reception at the Country Club of Virginia. I requested leave for the ceremony. The Navy granted it. Mother called the day before my flight home. Victoria, there's been a complication with the seating arrangements. The Whitmores have some concerns about the visual impact of military uniforms in the wedding photos. Visual impact? Well, you understand. Bradley's family has certain expectations about tradition and propriety. A naval uniform might send the wrong message about our family's priorities. I was 26 years old, a lieutenant junior grade with 2 commendations for excellence, and my own mother was uninviting me to my sister's wedding because my uniform didn't match the decor. What message would that be, Mother? That we're not refined, that we don't understand appropriate social boundaries. I'd hung up and caught the next flight back to Norfolk. Madison sent a text 3 days later. Disappointed you couldn't make it. The photos turned out beautifully. The marriage lasted 18 months. Bradley Whitmore III, it turned out, had a gambling problem and a wandering eye. The divorce was quiet, expensive, and absolute. Madison moved back home, and I sent a sympathy card from my deployment in the South China Sea. By the time I made lieutenant commander, Madison had reinvented herself as a philanthropist. Her Instagram was full of charity galas and museum openings, carefully curated images of Richmond's rising social set. She dated a city councilman, then a bank vice president, then a tech entrepreneur who sold his startup for 8 figures. Each relationship lasted just long enough for engagement rumors to start circulating before ending amicably. Madison had learned to navigate the social ecosystem like a submarine captain reading sonar. She could identify potential mates by their portfolio value and social connections, approach with perfect timing, and extract herself before any real damage occurred. Meanwhile, I'd earned my first command, the USS Monterey, an Aegis cruiser with a crew of 400 and enough firepower to level a city block. Mother's Christmas card that year mentioned Madison's volunteer work with 3 different children's charities. My promotion to ship's captain merited a single line, "Victoria continues her naval service." The pattern held for years. Madison's accomplishments were achievements, mine were service. Her photographs appeared in style magazines. My commendations appeared in Navy publications nobody in Richmond read. When she chaired the Hospital Foundation's annual fundraiser, the event raised $2 million and earned her a profile in Virginia Living magazine. When I led a multinational task force through the Strait of Hormuz during a tense standoff with Iranian forces, Dad mentioned it to his golf partner and Mother changed the subject. The breaking point came during Dad's illness, pancreatic cancer, diagnosed at stage 4. I was stationed at Naval War College in Newport, finishing my master's degree in strategic studies. I flew home every weekend for 4 months, coordinating with his doctors, managing his care, sitting beside his hospital bed during the long nights when sleep wouldn't come. Madison visited twice. "It's just so depressing," she confided to Mother, thinking I couldn't hear from the hallway. "And the smell of hospitals makes me nauseous. I'm more useful organizing the meal trains and handling the social responsibilities." Social responsibilities. While I was researching experimental treatments and interviewing oncologists, Madison was ensuring the right people sent flowers and knew which charity to donate to in Dad's honor. When he died, I was holding his hand. Madison was at a junior league meeting she couldn't possibly miss. The funeral director asked about military honors. Dad had served briefly in Vietnam before building his business empire. Of course, I arranged everything. 21-gun salute, flag ceremony, the works. Mother delivered the eulogy. Madison read a poem about angels and eternal peace. I sat in the front row in dress blues, the flag from Dad's casket folded in my lap, and listened to them rewrite history in real time. Richard was a family man first, Mother told the packed church. He believed in tradition, in values that built strong communities and lasting legacies. No mention of his pride when I'd made Admiral, no reference to the framed photo of my promotion ceremony that had sat on his desk until the day he died. Just tradition and community values and the kind of legacy that looked good in obituaries. After the service, Madison hugged friends and accepted condolences with perfect grace. I stood by the grave as they lowered the casket, surrounded by naval officers who'd come to pay their respects to one of their own. Admiral Hartwell? A young ensign approached hesitantly. I served under you on the Monterey. Just wanted to say your father would be proud of everything you've accomplished. Madison overheard. Her smile never wavered, but her eyes sharpened. Later, as the crowd dispersed, she cornered me by the cemetery gate. Did you really need to make such a production out of this? The military ceremony, all those uniforms? This was supposed to be about Dad, not your career. It was about honoring his service. He served for 18 months 40 years ago. You've made it your entire identity. That was the last conversation we'd had until the wedding invitation arrived on my kitchen counter 8 years later. 8 years of silence, broken only by the formal holiday cards Mother continued to send. The Hartwell family wishes you peace and joy this holiday season. Never love Mom and Madison. Always the Hartwell family, as if I existed in some parallel universe where family membership required annual renewal and mine had been quietly allowed to lapse. Now Madison wanted me at her wedding. To Captain James Thompson, a Marine whose life I'd saved and who apparently had no idea his future sister-in-law was the Admiral who'd called in the naval gunfire that extracted his unit from an ambush in Afghanistan. The irony was sharp enough to cut glass. For years, my family had treated my military service like an embarrassing phase I'd refused to grow out of. Now Madison needed that service to add gravitas to her wedding, legitimacy to her marriage, and prestige to her new identity as a military wife. She wanted Admiral Victoria Hartwell at her ceremony. She just didn't want her sister Vicky anywhere near her life. Admiral Patricia Knox answered on the second ring, her voice carrying that familiar blend of authority and warmth that had guided me through some of the darkest moments of my career. Victoria, what a pleasant surprise. How's the Pentagon treating you? Like a necessary evil, I said, settling into my desk chair. Patricia, I need your advice on something personal. A pause. Patricia Knox had been my mentor for 15 years, ever since I'd been a lieutenant commander struggling with the politics of advancement. She'd been one of the first women to break through the Navy's glass ceiling, and she'd made it her mission to pull other women up behind her. Your family again? My sister's getting married, to Captain James Thompson, Marine Corps. Thompson? I could hear papers rustling. Patricia kept mental files on every promising officer she'd ever encountered. Ah yes, good officer. Led that unit in Helmand that got into trouble a few years back. If I remember correctly, naval gunfire support saved their bacon. That was me. Silence stretched across the line, then Patricia's low whistle. Well. Does he know? Apparently not. His aide called to discuss seating arrangements. I'm being categorized as a, quote, colleague of the family. And your sister. I stared out at the Potomac, watching a Coast Guard cutter make its way upriver. Madison hasn't spoken to me in 8 years. Now suddenly she wants me at her wedding. But Thompson thinks I'm just some random admiral who needs to be managed for protocol purposes. Victoria, Patricia's voice took on that tone she used when she was about to deliver the hard truth. What do you think is really happening here? It was the question I'd been avoiding all day. I pulled out a legal pad and started sketching the connections, the way I'd map out tactical problems during war games. Madison marries a rising Marine officer. She becomes a military wife, which gives her instant credibility in certain social circles. Having an admiral as a sister-in-law doesn't hurt the optics. But she can't acknowledge our relationship without explaining 8 years of silence. So I'm invited as Admiral Hartwell, not as her sister. Thompson gets to have a prestigious guest at his wedding without knowing he's marrying into a family that disowned one of their own. Quote, and what happens when Thompson finds out the truth? That was the million-dollar question. I'd pulled Thompson's unit out of an ambush that should have killed half his men. I'd made split-second decisions under fire that saved lives and earned commendations. But to him, I was just another flag officer to be seated appropriately and thanked politely. I don't know, I admitted. Yes, you do. You're just afraid to say it out loud. Patricia was right. I did know. Thompson would be mortified. The Marine Corps took honor seriously, and discovering that he'd been unknowingly disrespecting the officer who'd saved his life would eat at him. Meanwhile, Madison would have to explain why she'd never mentioned having a sister, let alone one who'd been directly responsible for keeping her future husband alive. Patricia, what would you do? Honey, that's the wrong question. The question is, what do you want to accomplish? I closed my eyes. For years, I'd told myself I didn't care about my family's rejection. I'd built a life and career that needed no validation from Richmond society or anyone else. I commanded respect from world leaders, managed budgets larger than some countries' GDP, and slept well knowing I'd served with honor. But the invitation had cracked something open. Not a desire for reconciliation. That ship had sailed years ago, something harder to name. A need for acknowledgement, maybe, or justice. I want them to see me, I said finally, really see me, not as an embarrassment or a complication or a useful prop, as who I actually am. Then you know what you have to do. After I hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of my office. The Potomac had turned black, reflecting the lights of National Airport across the water. Planes took off and landed in steady patterns, each one carrying people toward destinations they'd chosen or been ordered to reach. I opened my laptop and started researching. Not military records this time, but social media, wedding planning websites, local news coverage. Madison's engagement had been announced in the Richmond Times-Dispatch Society pages, with a photo that could have been taken for a magazine spread. She wore a white sundress and pearls, James in khakis and a navy blazer. They looked perfect together. Young, attractive, successful. The article mentioned James's distinguished military service and Madison's, quote, philanthropic leadership in the Richmond community. No mention of family beyond daughter of Patricia and the late Richard Hartwell. I'd been edited out of her biography entirely. I found the wedding registry next. Pottery Barn, Williams-Sonoma, Bloomingdale's. China patterns and crystal stemware, the kind of gifts that said, we're building a proper life together. The most expensive item was a $3,000 dining room set. I could afford it without thinking, but that wasn't the point. The point was that Madison was marrying a man who dedicated his life to service, honor, and sacrifice, while actively concealing the fact that those same values had driven her sister away from the family. My phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Admiral Hartwell, this is Captain Thompson. I wanted to reach out personally about the wedding arrangements. I understand there may be some family complications, and I want to ensure your comfort at the ceremony. Perhaps we could speak directly? I stared at the message. Thompson was reaching out himself, not through his aide. That suggested either he'd learned something new about our relationship, or Madison had briefed him on the family complications without providing details. I typed back, Captain Thompson, I appreciate your courtesy. What specific complications are you referring to? The response came quickly. Madison mentioned you've been estranged from the family due to career demands. I have tremendous respect for the sacrifices military families make, and I don't want our wedding to create additional stress. Career demands. Madison had managed to reframe 8 years of deliberate exclusion as noble sacrifice for the greater good. In her version, I'd chosen duty over family, which made her the victim of my admirable but ultimately selfish dedication to service. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet. My dress uniforms hung in perfect order, each one representing different aspects of my career. Dress whites for formal ceremonies, dress blues for official functions, service dress for everyday military occasions. I pulled out the dress whites and laid them on the bed. Full decorations, 4-star shoulder boards, gold braid that caught the light like captured sunlight. It was a uniform that commanded attention, respect, immediate recognition of authority. It was also a uniform that would make hiding impossible. If I wore civilian clothes to Madison's wedding, I could blend into the background, play the role of distant family member, let the day proceed according to her careful choreography. But if I wore this uniform, the one that announced exactly who I was and what I'd accomplished, there would be no pretending I was just another guest. I picked up my phone and called the number Thompson had texted from. He answered immediately. Captain Thompson. Captain, this is Admiral Hartwell. I wanted to discuss the wedding arrangements directly. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for calling. I hope we can address any concerns you might have. His voice was steady, professional, but I caught an undercurrent of nervousness. Thompson knew he was walking into complicated territory, even if he didn't understand the exact nature of the complications. Captain, I'd like to clarify something. When you refer to family complications, what exactly has Madison told you about our relationship? A pause. She mentioned that your military obligations have created some distance over the years, and that family gatherings can be awkward. I see. And what do you know about my service record? Only what's publicly available, ma'am. Your promotions, major commands, decorations. Quite impressive. Have you reviewed my deployment history? Another pause. Longer this time. Should I have, Admiral? Captain Thompson, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I'd appreciate a direct answer. Have you ever served in Afghanistan? Yes, ma'am. 3 deployments. Helmand Province, 2018. The silence that followed was electric. I could almost hear the pieces clicking together in his mind. Admiral, he said slowly, were you the naval command that provided fire support during Operation Crimson Shield? I was. Another silence, this one heavy with implications. Ma'am, I need to call you back. Of course, Captain. Take your time. I hung up and looked at the dress-white uniforms spread across my bed. In 15 minutes, Captain James Thompson would realize that the woman he'd been treating as a protocol consideration was the same admiral who'd saved his life and the lives of 23 Marines under his command. And then he'd have to decide what to do about marrying a woman who'd never bothered to mention that detail. The game, as they say, was afoot. Thompson called back at 0630 hours. Military precision, even in personal crisis. Admiral Hartwell, I owe you an explanation. Quote, I was already dressed for my morning run, but something in his voice made me sit down. You don't owe me anything, Captain. Ma'am, with respect, I owe you everything. My men and I would be dead without your actions in Helmand. I've read the after-action reports a dozen times. You made calls under fire that saved 24 lives. 23, I corrected automatically. Corporal Martinez didn't make it. A sharp intake of breath. You remember their names? I remember all their names. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of shared combat experience. When Thompson spoke again, his voice had changed. Not just professional courtesy anymore, but something deeper. Recognition between warriors. Admiral, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me. Madison told me you were estranged because of your military commitments. Is that the whole truth? I looked out my apartment window at the morning runners along the Potomac Path, civilians starting their day with voluntary suffering, pushing themselves because they chose to, not because duty demanded it. Captain, what did Madison tell you about her family? That her parents were supportive but traditional, that they'd struggled with having a daughter in such a demanding career, that there had been philosophical differences about work-life balance. Philosophical differences. Madison had managed to make 8 years of deliberate exclusion sound like a thoughtful disagreement about time management. Captain Thompson, when exactly did Madison mention having a sister in the Navy? The pause told me everything. It came up when we were discussing the guest list. She said she wanted to invite you because it would mean a lot to have family support, despite the complications. And before that conversation? Before that, another pause. Admiral, I don't think Madison ever mentioned having a sister. I closed my eyes. Of course she hadn't. For months, maybe years, Madison had been building a relationship with a man whose life I'd saved, and she'd never once mentioned my existence. I was a ghost in my own family until she needed me for window dressing. Captain, I'm going to be direct with you. Madison and I haven't spoken in 8 years. The last conversation we had was at our father's funeral, where she accused me of making his military burial ceremony too much about my career. I wasn't invited to her first wedding because my uniform might send the wrong message to the groom's family. She's not inviting me as her sister who she loves despite our differences. She's inviting me as Admiral Hartwell, a prestigious guest who happens to share her last name. The silence that followed was so complete I wondered if the call had dropped. "Jesus Christ," Thompson whispered. "Captain? Admiral, I need some time to process this. Can we speak again before the wedding?" "Of course. But James?" I used his first name deliberately. "Whatever you decide to do with this information, remember that you're marrying Madison, not me. Don't let our family dysfunction derail your happiness." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your honesty." After I hung up, I went for my run. 5 miles along the river, pushing harder than usual, trying to outrun the knot of tension in my chest. By mile 3, I'd made my decision. By mile 5, I'd figured out how to execute it. Back home, I showered and called my aide, Commander Rebecca Walsh. Becky was 32, sharp as a knife, and had been managing my schedule and logistics for 2 years, with the efficiency of a Swiss watch. "Admiral, good morning. How can I help?" "Becky, I need you to arrange transportation to Richmond for this weekend, and I need you to call the Norfolk Naval Base Protocol Office." "Certainly, ma'am. What type of transportation, and what should I tell Norfolk?" "Commercial flight Friday evening, returning Sunday." "As for Norfolk, I need to speak with someone about proper military courtesy for a wedding ceremony where I'll be the senior officer present." Becky was good enough not to ask questions, but I could hear her curiosity in the slight pause. "Military courtesy at a civilian wedding, Admiral? The groom is an active-duty Marine Corps. There may be other service members present. I want to ensure I handle protocol appropriately." "Understood. Anything else?" "Yes. Reserve a room at the Jefferson Hotel in Richmond. And Becky? This is personal travel, not official business." "Copy that, Admiral." The Jefferson Hotel was old Richmond elegance at its finest, the kind of place where Madison's crowd gathered for charity luncheons and debutante balls. Staying there would send a message that I wasn't some visiting dignitary to be managed, but someone who belonged in Richmond's social ecosystem whether they acknowledged it or not. An hour later, my phone rang. Captain Thompson again. "Admiral, I've been thinking about our conversation." "And?" "I'd like to meet with you before the wedding, face to face. There are things I need to understand, and I'd prefer to have that conversation in person." "Where and when?" "Tomorrow evening. I could drive up to D.C. or—" "I'll be in Richmond Friday evening. We could meet then." "Perfect. Do you know the Ladybird Cafe downtown?" I almost smiled. The Ladybird was 3 blocks from the Jefferson, in the heart of Richmond's financial district. Neutral territory, upscale enough for serious conversation, public enough to prevent dramatics. "I know it. What time?" "Would 7 work?" "I'll be there." Friday arrived with unseasonable heat and humidity that made my dress whites feel like armor. I'd chosen the uniform deliberately after consulting with Norfolk's protocol office. As the senior military officer at a wedding involving active duty personnel, proper military courtesy required a dress uniform if I planned to participate in any ceremonial aspects. The flight to Richmond was mercifully short. As the plane descended over the familiar landscape of my childhood, I felt something I hadn't expected: homesickness. Not for the family that had rejected me, but for the place itself. The rolling hills, the historic architecture, the sense of deep roots and older values. The Jefferson Hotel lobby was exactly as I remembered: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and the kind of understated luxury that whispered rather than shouted. I checked in wearing civilian clothes, navy blazer, white slacks, minimal jewelry. The desk clerk was professionally courteous, but I caught the moment when he read my name on the reservation, and his eyes sharpened slightly. "Admiral Hartwell? Welcome back to Richmond. Will you be attending the Thompson-Hartwell wedding this weekend?" Word traveled fast in Richmond society. "I will." "How wonderful. Such a lovely couple. Miss Hartwell has been a fixture at our charity events for years. And Captain Thompson seems like a fine young man." I smiled non-committally and took my key cards. In the elevator, I wondered how many people in Richmond knew Madison was marrying a Marine, and how many knew she had a sister who was an admiral. The Venn diagram of those 2 pieces of knowledge would tell me everything about how tomorrow would unfold. My room overlooked the hotel's courtyard, where guests in summer dresses and sport coats gathered for an afternoon wedding reception. I watched them for a moment. The easy laughter, the comfortable intimacy of people who'd known each other for years, the seamless choreography of a social event where everyone knew their role. Tomorrow, I would walk into a similar gathering. But unlike these happy strangers, I would be walking into a minefield of family politics, buried resentments, and carefully constructed lies. I unpacked methodically, hanging my dress whites in the closet with the care they deserved. The uniform looked alien in this hotel room, too crisp and military for the genteel Richmond setting. But that was the point. I wasn't here to blend in or make anyone comfortable. At 6:45, I walked the 3 blocks to Lady Bird Cafe. Richmond's downtown sparkled in the early evening light, all renovated warehouses and trendy restaurants. The city had evolved since my childhood, but its essential character remained: proud, traditional, and very aware of who belonged and who didn't. Thompson was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table in civilian clothes. He stood when he saw me, and for a moment we simply looked at each other. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with the kind of easy confidence that came from leading men in combat. But there was something else in his eyes now. Uncertainty, maybe guilt. "Admiral Hartwell, thank you for coming." "Captain Thompson." I sat across from him, noting that he'd chosen a table where we could speak privately. "You said you had questions." He nodded, then looked directly at me with the kind of focus that made him a good officer. "Admiral, I need to understand what I'm walking into tomorrow. Not just the family dynamics, but the ethical implications. If Madison has been deliberately concealing your relationship, what does that say about the foundation of our marriage?" It was a fair question and a hard one. I respected him for asking it. "Captain, that's something only you can answer. But I'll tell you this. Madison is very good at managing narratives. She always has been. The question is whether you can live with being part of a story that requires editing out inconvenient truths." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his untouched coffee. When he looked up, his expression had hardened into something I recognized: the look of a military officer making a difficult decision. "Admiral, there's something I need to tell you about tomorrow's ceremony, something Madison doesn't know." Quote, "My commanding officer is attending the wedding," Thompson said quietly. "General Marcus Stone, he's flying in from Quantico specifically for the ceremony." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Marcus Stone, 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force? You know him?" I knew him. General Stone had been a colonel when I'd coordinated the Helmand operation. He'd personally written the commendation that accompanied my Bronze Star for that mission. More importantly, he'd been one of the few senior officers who'd pushed for full recognition of naval support in joint operations. "We've worked together," I said carefully. "Captain, does General Stone know about your connection to Operation Crimson Shield?" Thompson's jaw tightened. "He was the one who recommended me for promotion after Helmand. Said the naval fire support I'd called in showed exceptional tactical awareness under pressure." He paused. "He doesn't know the naval commander was my future sister-in-law. The pieces were falling into place with mathematical precision. General Stone would be at the wedding, expecting to meet Captain Thompson's new family. When he saw me in dress whites, he'd recognize me instantly. The reunion between the admiral who'd saved his Marines and the captain who'd called in the fire mission would be impossible to ignore." "James," I said, using his first name again, "what exactly did you tell Madison about General Stone attending?" "That my commanding officer was coming, and that it was a significant honor. She was thrilled, said it would add gravitas to the ceremony." "Did you mention that General Stone was involved in the operation where you earned your commendation?" "No. Madison she doesn't really want to hear details about my deployments. She says they're too intense for social conversation." Of course she didn't. Madison had spent years crafting an image of herself as someone who supported the military in abstract, patriotic terms, while avoiding the messy realities of what that service actually entailed. Having her fiancé's combat experiences become dinner party conversation would complicate her carefully curated narrative. "Captain, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. What do you think will happen when General Stone sees me tomorrow?" Thompson closed his eyes. "He'll recognize you immediately. He'll want to acknowledge the connection, probably publicly, and then, quote, and then Madison will have to explain why she never mentioned having a sister who was involved in saving your life." Christ. Thompson ran his hands through his hair. she'll say she didn't know, that you never told her about the operation details. Will she? He looked at me directly. Admiral, would you have told her? I thought about that for a moment. If I'd been speaking to her at the time, yes. Military families share that kind of information. It's part of understanding what your service member does, why it matters. But you weren't speaking to her. No, we weren't. Thompson was quiet for a long time, staring out the cafe window at the Richmond evening. Young professionals walked past in summer clothes, heading to dinner or drinks, or whatever normal people did when their lives weren't complicated by family warfare and military protocol. Admiral, can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Do you want to reconcile with Madison? Is that why you're coming to the wedding? It was the question I'd been avoiding, the one that got to the heart of everything. I thought about it honestly, weighing my motivations against my hopes. No, I said finally. I don't think reconciliation is possible. Too much has happened, and Madison hasn't acknowledged any of it. But I want her to see the consequences of her choices. For 8 years, she's been able to pretend I don't exist. Tomorrow, that becomes impossible. Because of General Stone. Because of General Stone. Because of you. Because of the uniform I'll be wearing. The story she's been telling about her family is about to collide with reality. Thompson nodded slowly. And I'm caught in the middle. You're caught in the middle of a situation Madison created. That's not your fault. But I have to live with the consequences. Yes, you do. We sat in silence for a moment, then Thompson straightened up and first saw the Marine officer take control. Admiral, I have a decision to make about tomorrow. I can try to manage the situation, keep General Stone away from you, seat you in different sections, minimize the interaction, or I can let it happen, let the truth come out naturally and deal with whatever follows. I studied his face. This was the man who'd kept his unit together under fire, who'd made life and death decisions with incomplete information and lived with the results. He understood the weight of choices. What are you leaning toward? Toward the truth, he said. I've been thinking about something my father used to say. He was career Army, served in Desert Storm. He always told me that honor isn't something you wear on your uniform. It's something you carry in your actions. And if I marry Madison tomorrow while actively concealing this connection, what does that say about the foundation of our marriage? If she can rewrite her family history to avoid uncomfortable truths, what else will she edit when it becomes convenient? I felt a surge of respect for him. This was why he'd been a good officer, why his men had followed him into danger. He understood that some things mattered more than comfort or convenience. Captain, let me ask you one more question. Setting aside everything about me and Madison, do you love her? He was quiet for a long time. When he answered, his voice was careful, measured. I love the woman I thought I was marrying. But I'm starting to wonder how much of that woman was real versus how much was curated. The wedding was at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in the heart of Richmond's historic district. I arrived 30 minutes before the ceremony, timing calculated to avoid the early crowd but ensure I was seated before the processional began. The church was everything Madison would have wanted. Soaring Gothic arches, stained glass windows that painted rainbow light across the nave, flowers arranged with expensive precision. Guests filled the pews in their summer finery, Richmond society at its polished best. I entered through the main doors in full dress whites, 4 stars gleaming on my shoulder boards, ribbons arranged in perfect rows across my chest. The effect was immediate and electric. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Heads turned. The kind of attention that comes when someone who commands genuine respect enters a room full of people accustomed to manufactured importance. An usher approached nervously. Ma'am, are you Admiral Hartwell? I am. We have you seated in the 3rd section with the other military guests. Thank you. I followed him down the aisle, hyper-aware of the whispers starting behind me. This was Richmond society, encountering real power, the kind that came from achievement rather than inheritance. I took my assigned seat and looked around. The military section was small but distinguished. A few junior officers, some NCOs, what looked like a retired colonel and his wife. And in the front row of this section, a man I recognized immediately, General Marcus Stone. He was reading the program when I sat down 2 rows behind him. Then he glanced back, probably wondering about the late arrival, and our eyes met. The recognition was instant and mutual. Stone's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, pleasure, confusion, and then dawning understanding. He stood immediately. "Admiral Hartwell." His voice carried clearly in the church. What an unexpected honor. I stood as well. "General Stone, good to see you again." When James told me his family would be here, he didn't mention. Stone paused, clearly recalculating everything he thought he knew about this wedding. "Admiral, are you related to the bride?" Before I could answer, the church organ swelled into the processional, but the damage was done. Stone's voice had carried, and now half the church was staring at us, trying to process what they'd just heard. In the front row of the family section, I saw Mother's profile. Her face was pale, her mouth set in a thin line. She'd clearly hoped I would sit quietly in the back and avoid attention. That hope was about to be thoroughly destroyed. The processional began with Madison's bridesmaids, each one a study in coordinated perfection. Then came Madison herself, radiant in white silk and lace, her smile brilliant as she walked down the aisle on Mother's arm. She looked beautiful, confident, every inch the perfect bride, until her eyes swept across the congregation and landed on me. The smile faltered for just a moment, not enough for most people to notice, but I caught it. The slight stumble in her step, the barely perceptible tightening around her eyes. She'd known I was coming, but seeing me there in full uniform, with General Stone clearly recognizing me, was different from whatever scenario she'd imagined. She recovered quickly, of course. Madison had always been good at maintaining appearances, but I saw the calculation behind her eyes as she continued toward the altar. She was already figuring out how to manage this situation, how to control the narrative. What she didn't know was that the narrative was no longer hers to control. At the altar, Thompson waited in his dress blue uniform, looking every inch the Marine officer. When Madison reached him, he took her hands and smiled. But his eyes found mine over her shoulder, and in that look was a question. "Are you ready for this?" I nodded slightly. Whatever came next, we would face it with the truth. The Reverend began the ceremony with traditional words about love, commitment, and the joining of 2 families. Behind those words, I could feel the tension building like pressure in a boiler. General Stone kept glancing back at me. Other guests were whispering. Mother sat rigid in the front row, and Madison stood at the altar, beautiful and radiant, and completely unaware that her carefully constructed world was about to come apart. The moment of reckoning was coming. The only question was who would strike the match first. The ceremony proceeded with military precision, each word of the traditional service landing with weight in the charged atmosphere. I watched Thompson's face as he spoke his vows, searching for any sign of doubt or hesitation. But he was every inch the Marine officer, focused, committed, ready to follow through on his mission regardless of personal cost. "Do you, James Mitchell Thompson, take Madison Clare to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," his voice carried clearly through the church, steady and sure. "Do you, Madison Clare Hartwell, take James Mitchell to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Madison's "I do" was softer, but no less certain. Whatever else she wasn't backing down from this moment. The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife. Thompson kissed his bride while the congregation applauded, and for a moment it was just a normal wedding, beautiful, traditional, exactly what Richmond society expected. Then General Stone stood up. Military protocol demanded that junior officers acknowledge senior commands, and Stone was old school enough to follow protocol even at social events. He stepped into the aisle as the recessional began, clearly intending to intercept the wedding party before they left the sanctuary. "Captain Thompson," Stone's voice boomed across the church. "Congratulations, son, and Mrs. Thompson." He nodded to Madison with proper courtesy before his eyes found mine. "Admiral Hartwell, I believe congratulations are in order for you as well. What a remarkable coincidence." Madison's smile became brittle. "I'm sorry, General, but I don't think we've been introduced." "Marcus Stone, 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force." I had the honor of serving with your sister during Operation Crimson Shield in Afghanistan. The word sister hit the congregation like a physical blow. Conversation stopped. Heads swiveled. The kind of silence that precedes explosions. Madison's face went through a remarkable transformation. Confusion, shock, and then something harder to define. Not quite panic, but close. I think there's been some confusion, General. This is Admiral Hartwell, a family friend. Stone's eyebrows rose. Family friend? Ma'am, with respect, Admiral Hartwell is listed in the wedding program as Victoria Hartwell, sister of the bride. I watched Madison's eyes dart to the program in her hands, then back to Stone's face. The program had been printed weeks ago, when she'd still been managing the fiction that I was her estranged but beloved sister. Now that fiction was colliding with her attempt to minimize my presence. Yes, well, the family relationships are complicated, Madison said, her social training kicking in. Victoria and I have had limited contact due to her military obligations. Limited contact? Stone looked genuinely puzzled. Captain Thompson, didn't you tell me your sister-in-law was the naval commander who provided fire support for your unit in Helmand? The silence that followed was deafening. Thompson stood frozen, his hand still holding Madison's, caught between conflicting loyalties and impossible choices. James? Madison's voice was barely a whisper. What is he talking about? Before Thompson could answer, I stepped forward. 8 years of silence. 8 years of being erased from family history. 8 years of watching from the sidelines, while Madison crafted her perfect life. It all crystallized into this moment. Madison, I said, my voice carrying the authority of command. Perhaps we should have this conversation somewhere more private. No. Madison's chin lifted with familiar stubbornness. If there's something to discuss, we can discuss it here. In front of our guests. Our friends. It was a challenge, delivered with the confidence of someone who'd spent years controlling narratives and managing social situations. But Madison had never faced an opponent trained in strategic warfare. Very well, I turned to address General Stone, but my words were meant for the entire congregation. General, Captain Thompson's unit came under heavy fire during a reconnaissance mission in the Kajaki district. They were pinned down by insurgents with superior positioning and firepower. Captain Thompson called for naval gunfire support. Stone nodded. Most effective fire mission I'd seen in 2 decades. Textbook precision under extreme conditions. Quote, the decision to provide that support fell to me as the senior naval officer in theater. It required coordination between multiple platforms, real-time targeting adjustments, and acceptance of significant risk to our own forces. I could feel the attention of everyone in the church, but my focus remained on Madison's face. She was beginning to understand where this was heading. 23 Marines lived because of decisions made in that command center. Captain Thompson earned a commendation for his tactical awareness under pressure. I received the Bronze Star for naval gunfire coordination. Admiral, Stone interrupted, that commendation should have been higher. Your actions that day? Thank you, General, but that's not the point. I looked directly at Madison. The point is that your husband owes his life to decisions I made 3 years ago. And until yesterday, he had no idea his future sister-in-law was the officer who'd kept him alive. Madison's face had gone completely white. That's not possible. You never told me about any operation in Afghanistan. You never mentioned James's name. Madison, we haven't spoken in 8 years. The last conversation we had was at Dad's funeral, where you accused me of making his military burial too much about my career. I kept my voice level professional. When exactly would I have mentioned it? The congregation was completely silent now, everyone straining to hear this family drama unfold in real time. I could see Mother in the front row, her face a mask of horror. This was her worst nightmare. Private family business becoming a public spectacle. But James knew, Madison said desperately. James knew about you. He arranged the seating, the protocol. James knew Admiral Hartwell was attending, I corrected. He didn't know Admiral Hartwell was his future sister-in-law until I told him yesterday evening. Thompson finally found his voice. Madison, we need to talk, privately. No, I want to understand this. Madison's voice was rising, her careful composure finally cracking. Victoria, are you telling me that you saved James's life and you never thought to mention it? I'm telling you that you spent months planning a wedding to a man whose life I saved, never once mentioning you had a sister, let alone one in the Navy. When his aide called about seating arrangements, I was categorized as a, quote, colleague of the family. A colleague? Stone looked from me to Madison, clearly struggling to process this information. Ma'am, your sister is one of the most distinguished naval officers of her generation. How could you not mention? Because she chose her career over her family. Madison's composure shattered completely. Because everything always has to be about Admiral Victoria Hartwell and her precious military service. Even at my wedding, she has to make it about her accomplishments, her medals, her dramatic rescues. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. Not hurt exactly, but something harder. Clarity. Madison, I said quietly, I came here wearing this uniform because proper military protocol required it when attending a wedding with active duty personnel. I sat where your husband's aide instructed me to sit. I said nothing during the ceremony. The only reason this conversation is happening is because General Stone recognized me and acknowledged our professional connection. Professional connection? Madison laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Is that what we're calling it? You saved my husband's life and it's just a professional connection? What would you call it? I'd call it the kind of thing you tell your family about. The kind of thing you share with the people who are supposed to matter to you. The irony was so perfect it took my breath away. Madison, when exactly should I have shared this with you? During one of our weekly phone calls? At a family Christmas dinner? Maybe during one of those visits when you came to see me in the hospital after I was injured in combat? You were never injured in shrapnel from an IED in Syria 2019, concussion and internal injuries. I was in Bethesda Naval Hospital for 3 weeks. I sent you a text from my hospital bed telling you where I was. You responded, sorry to hear that, hope you feel better soon. I could see the memory hitting her, the moment she realized she couldn't rewrite this particular history. I didn't know it was serious. You didn't ask. General Stone stepped forward, his command presence filling the space between us. Ladies, perhaps this conversation should continue somewhere more appropriate. But Madison wasn't finished. 8 years of buried resentment was pouring out, and she seemed unable to stop it. You want to know the truth, Victoria? The truth is that you made your choice a long time ago. You chose the Navy over everything else. Over family, over relationships, over any kind of normal life. And now you show up here in your fancy uniform with your medals and your rank, expecting everyone to bow down and worship your service. I don't expect anything from you, Madison. I never have. Good, because you're not getting it. You're not getting forgiveness for missing my first wedding, or sympathy for your lonely military life, or gratitude for doing your job in Afghanistan. You made your choices. Live with them. The words hit their target with precision. But instead of pain, I felt something unexpected. Relief. For 8 years, I'd wondered if I could have done something different, said something else, found some way to bridge the gap between us. Now I knew the truth. Madison didn't want reconciliation. She wanted capitulation. She wanted me to apologize for the life I'd chosen, for the career I'd built, for the person I'd become. She wanted me to admit that everything I'd accomplished was worth less than her approval. You're right, I said. I did make my choices. I chose service over comfort. I chose duty over social expectations. I chose to earn my place in the world rather than inherit it. I looked around the church, at the faces of Richmond society watching our family implode in real time. I chose to save your husband's life when he called for help, and I'd make that same choice again, knowing what I know now, because that's what service means, Madison. It means putting other people's lives ahead of your own comfort, your own convenience, your own carefully curated image. I turned to Thompson, who stood frozen between his new wife and the officer who'd kept him alive. Captain, congratulations on your marriage. You're a good Marine and a good man. I hope you'll be happy together. To General Stone, General, it was an honor serving with you. And finally to Madison. Mrs. Thompson, I wish you well, but I won't be attending your reception. I walked down the aisle with military bearing, my footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. Behind me, I could hear Madison starting to cry, Thompson trying to comfort her, General Stone attempting to restore some semblance of order. But I didn't look back. I'd spent 8 years looking back, wondering what I could have done differently. Now I knew. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding, some families aren't worth saving, and some truths are too heavy for people who've built their lives on comfortable lies. Outside the church, Richmond's summer heat hit me like a physical force. I walked the 3 blocks back to the Jefferson Hotel, changed out of my uniform, and caught the first flight back to Washington. By the time my plane lifted off, Madison's wedding reception was probably in full swing. The bride and groom would make their entrance, cut their cake, dance their first dance. The guests would eat dinner and drink champagne, and pretend they hadn't witnessed a family destroy itself in public. And tomorrow, Captain and Mrs. Thompson would begin their married life, knowing that their foundation included a fundamental lie about who they were and where they'd come from. I looked down at Richmond shrinking below me and felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. For the first time in 8 years, the story was complete. Not the ending Madison had wanted, not the reconciliation Mother had hoped for, but the truth. Sometimes that's the best you can do. 3 days later, I received a package at my Pentagon office. Inside was a wedding photo. James and Madison cutting their cake, both of them smiling for the camera. On the back, in Thompson's precise handwriting, Admiral Hartwell, thank you for your service in Afghanistan and at our wedding. With respect and gratitude, Captain and Mrs. Thompson. Below that, in Madison's familiar script, Victoria, I'm sorry it took a wedding to make us both tell the truth. Maybe someday we can try again. Your sister M. I put the photo in my desk drawer, next to the commendation from Operation Crimson Shield. Maybe someday we could try again. Maybe someday the truth would be enough foundation to build something new on. But today, it was enough that the truth had finally been told. The cream-colored envelope that had started this story sat in my apartment trash can, torn open and discarded. But the uniform hanging in my closet remained, pressed and ready, because regardless of family drama or personal cost, some things remained constant. Duty, honor, service. The rest was just noise. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.